Okay, welcome to the second general meeting this year of the Grayson County Historical Society. Since we last met, we've had a mostly uneventful 3 months, but we have discovered a serious problem in the south wall of the Buchanan log cabin. The bottom log on that wall was so rotted that it collapsed of its own weight, and the log above it is also in poor condition. This problem came about because the daubing was incorrectly applied and water was collecting behind the logs. Board members Mike Fleener and Scott Carter have created a temporary clamp to keep the logs on the east side from bowing out too far as a result of the loss of the log on the south side. Eventually, these logs will be replaced. The Master Gardeners Club is in the second year of improving the landscaping here at the house. They have rescued the herb garden on the Clinton Street side and created a flower bed behind the house. We appreciate their efforts. Our speaker at the October general meeting will be Rose Booth, who along with other representatives will address a proposal to establish a chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution in Grayson County. After our meeting tonight, we will be serving refreshments in the dining room. So please be sure and stay after our speaker tonight concludes his program. Our speaker tonight is a familiar figure to our society. He is David Wallace Ace. He's the son of D.L. and Ruth Hayes. Both are still residents of Litchfield. His mother is 86 and will be 87 in August. His father turned 87 in March. They celebrated their 70th wedding on December 29th of last year. He is a 1966 graduate of Litchfield High School, received a BA from the University of Kentucky and an MA in rank 1 from Western Kentucky University. He taught 27 years in the Breckinridge County School Districts at Hardensburg Elementary, primarily history, but also science and civics. He retired in 1998 and began working full-time as a reporter, photographer, editor for the Herald News in Hardensburg. He has always liked trains and railroads and is old enough to remember seeing steam engines operate through Litchfield, especially from the loading docks of his father's wholesale grocery, D.J. Hayes Wholesale Grocery. David will now present a PowerPoint program on the Kentucky Division of the Illinois Central Railroad with an emphasis on the IC in Grayson County. Ladies and gentlemen, David Wallace Hayes.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Ken. It's going to be a PowerPoint program, and I'm going to advance it. But if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. That's the teacher coming out of it. Or speak out if you want to. I'll try to answer them. My interest, as you mentioned, in railroads goes way back to when my father, you'll see in just a minute, warehouse, the building is still standing, D.G. Hayes Wholesale Grocery. And so every time I heard a whistle, went to the loading dock. So I've got some good visual memories of steam engines, because the Kentucky Division of Illinois Central was the last of that railroad to be dieselized, because it came through the Western Kentucky coal fields. They didn't want to upset some of their major shippers by switching to the new famed diesel electric locomotive. But eventually, they did switch because of high maintenance costs for maintaining locomotives, and also giving them more power and the ability to move longer in trains would save them some money. Over on your right over here is a map that I found off of eBay. I've seen one of them before in one of the Illinois Central business offices that I frequent in the past. But in red, you'll see the Illinois Central Railroad system per se, probably at its zenith, which was about 6,800 miles. The primary route was from Chicago, which is where their headquarters were on Lake Michigan, down to New Orleans. It's a straight north-south route. But then it did have some branches off. One particularly, the one I'm interested in, is the one that went off to Louisville. And this was the furthest eastern part of it. In fact, Hodgenville is the furthest eastern point on that railroad. You had a lot of lines in Illinois, the main line, and you had what they called the charter line. It was a land grant railroad. They received property on the center part of the state. And then they built out into Iowa, went all the way to Sioux City, and also to Omaha. Down here, they even had a line that they used to get to Birmingham, and they made connections there with the railroad in central Georgia, and then Florida railroads. They ran passenger trains all the way from Chicago to Florida, as did several other railroads that were in competition. So quite an extensive railroad. As time progressed, the ownership of the Illinois Central decided to slim down, and that's when they started selling off lines and also abandoning lines, which they did quite frequently. And in Kentucky, they sold the line through Litchfield, and you need to be thankful that you still have a railroad. Thanks to two gentlemen down in Paducah who purchased the biggest part of the line and then renamed it the Paducah and Louisville Railroad. And the cap that I have on is a cap that they gave out last year, the 25th anniversary of that company. And so it's amazing that they stayed in business. They're flourishing, but you know, things could change very easily, very quickly. One of their biggest shipping commodities is coal, and they're talking about it in Louisville, and one of their biggest customers is LG&E, talking about switching to propane gas instead of coal, which will be of great detriment to their revenue if they do that. But anyway, as we go along, and I do have some items here I'll share with you, and I'm going to give something to the Historical Society. I go on eBay, and I should stay away from eBay. I spend too much money. But I do have a deck of cards that the Illinois Central put out. It's entitled the Panama Limited, which was one of their famous trains overnight from Chicago, and it's all Pullman, all sleeper for many years to New Orleans. Also, and they have one here, there is a medallion, and there are bigger ones that are embedded in granite. There's one on the square in Elizabethtown, there's one on the square in Owensboro. Certain communities got these, but it commemorates the 100th birthday of the Illinois Central, 1951. And this one was used as a paperweight. The first one I ever saw was at the Litchfield Gazette. Billy Hughes had one that he used as a paperweight, and I thought, well, I'd like to get that one day. But you can find them on eBay too as well. There are also smaller ones of this that were given to employees and they also had their names on those. But the bigger ones were in granite and put out display. I love timetables. This is an employee timetable, which is different than the public timetable. This listed all the passenger trains. This listed passenger and freight both and gave some operating information. This just basically gave times the trains arrived or departed. And then menus, here's one from the Panama Limited, and I'll pass this around. This, of course, as I said, this was all Pullman, so it was quite exclusive. You had to have some money, it had to be somebody, I guess, in order to ride it. Their menu prices by today's standards are not bad. In fact, almost very economical if you look at the price, but I'll pass that around and look. I collect, of course, there's a lot of books, and you're going to see some pictures from this book. A friend of mine in Louisville, he's now deceased, had a good camera. He worked for Gatchell's in Louisville and took a lot of good photographs of railroads in the Louisville area. And some of his, he had a whole section on Illinois Central in this book that was published after his death. And then another good source of information is the Illinois Central Railroad Employee magazine that came out monthly. A lot of good information in it, and especially about individuals, you know, people that work for the railroad. And the railroad did employ people locally. It was important. It was a lifeline in the beginning because this was the best means of transportation they had. This is how everything came into town and left town, was by rail. And of course, the highways got better in the 1920s and the 30s, and then of course traffic moved. Of course, they got a resurgence during World War II. They got a lot of business then, passengers too as well. But then that dropped off after the war, and their passenger trains started losing money because nobody was riding them, so they discontinued. And then there are certain groups now. This is called the Mid-American, and that's the nickname for the Illinois Central, is the main line of Mid-America, and they do a good job. This is a current historical group. And then here's the Bible for most people who like the Illinois Central. and that's the book that was written for the Centennial by Carlton J. Coyless. And he wrote this with the blessing of the company, and it's the Bible, and you all have a copy now, because I gave you one. You can also find that on eBay too as well. But tonight I'm going to also share with you, and before we leave tonight, I'll give you a copy. Here's a magazine article that came in 1935 in the Employees Magazine, and it's about the bridge of Eclipse, which we'll talk about, the one that's, what they call it, the Big Cliff Viaduct. Okay.
David?
Yes, sir.
Let me interrupt just a minute. I forgot something.
Yes.
Scott Carter wants to make an announcement.
We can talk about it afterwards. As many of you have heard, the Grayson County Old Time Film Festival has been changed this year. It's not going to be over at Rough River. They're going to try to do it up on the square on the 21st of July. It'll start, I think, approximately 8 o'clock in the morning and run all day well into the night. The board has decided that we're going to have the house open, have an open house kind of like what we did for the Centennial Celebration on the square, since it's going to be held on the square this year for the Film Festival. And anybody from the general membership that's willing to come help, even if it's just for an hour or two, it's really going to take a lot of strain off of the current board. The Boy Scouts are going to be set up in the backyard cooking food and refreshments to sell to the people that are there for the Filling Festival. And we figured if they're going to be back there, we might as well have the house open, and maybe we can generate some new membership, get some donations, and just let people know that we're still here. So please keep that in mind. That's the 21st, and any time during that day would be great.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Okay. Sounds like a good time. Oh, one more item I mentioned, forgot to mention. I also look for dining car stuff too as well. Now that's getting really expensive because a lot of it's silver and crystal. This is not crystal, but the company did come out with glasses. So I got a whole set of those, found them on eBay. Stay away from eBay. Okay, here's a map of the area, central part of the Illinois Central, and as I said, this is the line that I'm interested in because it came through my hometown of Litchfield. Now, let's see. Now, looking at the Illinois Central in Kentucky, the main line from Louisville down through western Kentucky through Litchfield. Sorry about that. Go back. And then all the way down to Fulton, which you can't see, it's off the screen. That was your main line, main traffic line. You had a branch that went to Hodgenville, which is the most eastern part of the line, even further east than Indianapolis. You had that was about 17 miles. You also had a line that went to Owensboro that was about 41 miles from Horse Branch. You had another line that was built in the 20s from Central City to Dawson Springs, about the same mileage as the original line. They call that the new line as opposed to the old line. That primarily was built to serve coal mines in Hopkins County and Muhlenberg County. Down here at Princeton, you had a line that was about, I think it's about 50 miles maybe, down to Hopkinsville down here. You also had another line about 100 miles from Princeton north that went all the way to Henderson, and then they used the LMN to get into Evansville. Tracking trikes across their bridge there, and then there was a line from Illinois that came down from the north into Evansville, so they connected. You had some branches in here in Webster County that served primarily coal mines. So that's basically the Illinois Central in Kentucky. Now, where did I get my start? Right here, the loading dock. Okay, and we had a siding, which my father informed me when they first came to Litchfield, they had to pay for this siding to be put there, even though we were shipping and receiving freight too as well. If you look at a profile chart, these are good. The railroad put these out. It shows you elevation, it shows you grade, it shows you curves on the line, it shows you structures, it shows grade crossings, it gives you section crews. They usually had about 8 or 9 miles that they took care of. Shows you that this was ballast, that solid black line. And then if you look, I don't know if you can see it or not, but if you look at Litchfield, over here there's a little siding, and it says Hayes Siding, okay, for the D.G. Hayes Wholesale Grocery Company. And there it is. It's still there today. They don't have hardly any, they have very few local customers in Grayson County, so most of it's through through freight, primarily coal north. My second venue to see trains, you all, I had to pay dearly for this one. Miss Ella Wortham, and you remember Miss Ella, we taught kindergarten. Miss Ella's house was right by the Illinois Central line over there off of what, North England. So Miss Ella's kindergarten, when you went to kindergarten, you followed her rules. And one was you don't get up out of your chair unless you're told to. Well, unfortunately, she had a nice big window right by the railroad track. And every chance I got, when I heard a whistle, I went to the window. Well, Miss Ella also had a big chair that you had to sit in called the bad chair. Well, I have to report that most of my kindergarten first year was spent in the bad chair. Because I wanted to see what was going by. And I've got some good memories of passenger and freight trains in my mind. So anyway, that's just a little sidelight. Miss Ella didn't encourage my railroad interest. Just to give you some history, the line through here was several companies. It was the Elizabethtown Paducah Railroad. It was chartered in 1867. I have to go back because I've got a timer on it. It was completed between those 2 points in 1872. Then they built a branch 2 years later to Louisville. That was the branch to Louisville. Today, of course, it's the main line. C.P. Huntington, who was a big railroad magnate, consolidated the Elizabethtown, Paducah, and the Memphis Railroad, and he put them all together, renamed it the Chesapeake, Ohio, and Southwestern. Went all the way to Memphis. He was trying to put together a transcontinental railroad from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. He didn't succeed, though. 1896, this line was sold to the Illinois Central. 1986, the line was sold to two investors, Jim Smith and David Reed. David Reed had a big quarry down at Grand Rivers, still there today, sold out. Jim Smith was another entrepreneur. He had a little bit of everything going on in Paducah. He's now deceased. But they bought the line and also the Paducah shops, both of which are now separate entities in itself. But the line today is 49% owned by CSX, which is the descendant of the Louisville National Railroad and others. And then the other 51% is owned by individuals. But it's not a public company. Paducah and Louisville Railroad, you can run into these all over the place. People still get them, stock certificates. Not worth much. A lot of counties purchased stock in order to get the railroad built and built through here because it was, it was a valuable form of transportation, and it helped to increase the productivity of the area as well. Now let's go to Louisville. The big station in Louisville for the Illinois Central was down on the river. It was first known as Union Depot, and then it was changed to Central Station because people got confused. There was a Union Station too as well, 10th and Broadway. So they had to change the name in order to avoid that confusion. Big, tall structure, several floors, and had a big tower on it. All this was taken off during World War II, and it ended up with 2 levels. I was only in it one time, and that was to visit the freight office there. But the line came into Louisville, and it came through their yard, and then it came around here. It used some trackage rights over the Pennsylvania Railroad, ended up along the river. The Illinois Central owns some trackage down here, right on the Ohio River. This just gives you a track profile showing you Central Station. Several other companies used it too, as well as Chesapeake and Ohio, Baltimore, Ohio, the Southern, New York Central came into Louisville. They all use Central Station. The yard that the Illinois Central used is kind of unique. It was called the Texas Yard over here and the Battleground Yard here, which I think probably refers to a battle that was fought there during an Indian conflict. The Texas Yard refers to another railroad that came into this, and this is over at 14th and 15th and Oak Street. Now, this is just some pictures from Jack Faber's book with the big locomotives. They classify them according to wheel arrangement, and they start with the front, that's 2, and then you had the drivers, which was another set of numbers, and then the trailing wheels down here. So that's what we mean by the classification according to wheels. That was a passenger train coming in and a local going to Hodgeville. Cold day, in the yard, a lot of steam. Here's Big Bertha, they only have one of her. She could master 260 pounds per square feet, or square inch rather, pressure. Steam engines are just normally just dirty. A lot of coal, a lot of steam, a lot of ash. I've seen a lot of slides of people washing these locomotives at Oak Street. But they were basically black, and you had your lettering IC Railroad on the side and the numbers. This is what the roundhouse looked like at Oak Street. It was quite impressive with a turntable. This was a Caulfield and Snook photograph. They were photographers in Louisville. This is what the interior looked like. And this is where the engines were serviced when they came in and got ready for the next trip. I love these cabooses, you don't see them anymore. They've become collector's items, but here's a traditional IC caboose, and this happens to be wood. All their passenger trains had to come through here too as well to get to Central Station. They also had to cross the Southern Railway too here, and this was, when they meet, like for example, here's the stop sign, so the Illinois Central trains had to come to a stop. There was no automatic interlocking, they just had to look both ways and then go across, just like an intersection. Here's again Central Station, of course susceptible to flooding, because it's right next to the Ohio River. This is what it looked like in 1937.
Is it still like
first two
that building?
No, it was torn down to make way for Interstate 64. And Central Station, IC ran 4 trains a day in each direction. 2 of them were considered fast trains, and 2 of them were slower accommodations. But they had, I think, 7 tracks altogether, platforms. And of course, you had to cross the track to get over to the station. Some stations had subways that go underneath. Here's 1916 Timetable. I collect those, as I mentioned. The trains carried coaches, dining cars, parlor cars, and even Pullman sleepers.
How many trains a day?
4 each way.
4 each way?
Yeah. One accommodation began in Central City and came to Louisville. One began in Fulton and came to Louisville. So you had different times, all the time. This tells you when they were discontinued too as well. 1931 was the first one. 41, and 2 more came off, and then 54 was when the daytime train, 101, 102 were discontinued, and then the last one was January the 30th, 1957, and these were the nighttime trains. Now, that one I got to ride as a child. We had to go to Louisville to the hospital there to see my grandfather, and all I can remember is getting up very early. My parents loved to put a cold washcloth on my face to wake me up, and even today I hate that. I hate that. I always warm up my water before I wash my face for that reason. But anyway, I've got some memories of that train ride. It didn't have a dining car, it had a sleeper and had coaches, and that's all. But I can remember looking out the window and seeing certain sights that still remember. Now, as I was growing up, we didn't see passenger trains very often, but I could count on one a year, and that was at Derby. They used to run them from both Memphis and New Orleans. This one's coming into Louisville. They would arrive on Friday, come through Litchfield about 7 o'clock in the morning, and it had a different sound to it. Beautiful cars. And I've got a model over there. I love the IC's passenger cars, the way the coloration, chocolate, orange, and yellow. Here it is going out over the bridge over the Ohio River. This was owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad. And then they would pull it back into Central Station. And this was basically their home during the Derby. They put soil cans underneath there because at this time you didn't have retention toilets. It just went straight out. I mean, when you flushed, you looked through, you saw daylight. So they had to have cans there to collect it. That's the reason why it said in the car, do not flush while standing in the station or stopped. Okay, let me back up just for a second. This is a menu I collected. This train from New Orleans was a big party train. The menu, they even had a menu for each meal and each day. I've got these off of eBay. They gave them each a derby glass from the Illinois Central Derby Special, but it was a class act. It was all Pullman, it had parlor cars, dining cars, and that was it. This 1958, you all, the last steam engine in Louisville, okay, that was operating on schedule. Okay, but here's what the future was right here. General Motors GP9s, and again, they were less expensive to operate, more powerful.
Back up to the picture there, the last string.
Yes. I mean, this one?
One more.
One more, okay.
See the guy in white there, the tall fellow?
This one right here?
Yeah, that's one of your board members' father.
Oh, I did.
It's my
Albert
dad.
Newton.
Okay, and what was his name?
Albert Newton from Millwood.
Millwood, okay. Great, I'm glad
That's
you.
my daddy.
Was he an engineer?
No, he was pipe fitter.
Pipe fitter, okay. Well,
He
great.
worked in the shop.
So you've seen this photograph before?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I had seen it before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It used to be in the roundhouse there in Louisville.
Louisville, okay. Well, then, yes.
Me and Lewis had an uncle that worked for Miss Railroad. He worked in the boiler room. He was
At South Louisville
Yeah.
shops. But anyway, let's go forward on that.
correct.
But the Jeeps were gonna take over, and they did. Here's a story of Railroad Ace saying they ordered another 70 of them, and pretty soon they were everywhere. They took over every freight operation. And I can remember hitting Dad. I said, "Let's go out to see this special trains coming through with all this new equipment." And of course, now I wish I'd paid more attention to the steam engines, and I also had a camera too as well. The Green Diamond, which was an Illinois Central train, it was a special design built for the IC Streamline. It came to Louisville on display, and that was Casey Jones' widow there. Now, this train was the city of New Orleans. This took over as 101 and 102. I think Mr. Smith said he wrote this. This provided a connection, let me back up, provided a connection to New Orleans from Louisville. They even changed the time of the train to make that connection in Fulton because the train coming from Chicago. And then in the afternoon, they returned after a connection with a train coming from New Orleans. But they all met at Fulton right here. And it was a straight shot. They used the diesel to start with. And they even put the train on display in Litchfield. This is a notice in the paper saying that it's going to be in display April the 18th for about an hour at the depot before it went into service. But they had a quick turnaround time in Fulton. The trouble with the diesel locomotive is that they couldn't keep the schedule. This line is curved, it's got a lot of ups and downs, hills, grades, and they decided to go back to a steam locomotive. That was the locomotive that they used for about, I think it was about 6 months. And then they went back to a steam locomotive. But they streamlined it so it would match the streamlined cars. Okay? The roundhouse crew hated this locomotive because it would get stuff up underneath that siding. It was hard to keep it operating, keep it clean, but it kept its schedule. But by 1949, the IC saw the writing on the wall, and they thought, well, people are not coming back to the trains. They'd rather use their automobile or their use airplanes too as well. So it went back to a local schedule. It was called the Kentucky Cardinal, and finally discontinued in 1964. That's what it looked like without the streamlining. This engine, by the way, had a sad ending. It ended up in a derailment north of Vine Grove, and both the engineer and the fireman were killed in that derailment. No passengers were. Now, I've ridden the whole line. I got my first ride out of Louisville in 1981 when the NRHS held its convention in Louisville, and they rode it out to, rode a special out to Fort Knox and back. So we had a photo run by at Cosmosdale, which is where the cement plant is. A photo run by, for those of you that are not rail fans, that's when they let everybody off the train, they back it up, and then they come forward again. So that way you can take a picture of it or video, because if you're on the train, you're never going to be able to photograph it, right? So it's for the benefit of the people who bought a ticket. That's the depot at Cosmosdale. It's kind of unique because it's made out of cement. What else would it be? Cosmosdale. And that's what it looks like today. It's still standing, but for how long, we don't know. It's on the endangered list in Jefferson County. Crossed over Salt River at West Point. And this was a turn span at one time, indicated by that center pier. We ran excursions in 1961 using one of the last remaining locomotives. This was built in Paducah during World War II. They backed up and they had a photo run by on Monroe Hill. Fort Knox is famous because of the gold, and IC handled 84 shipments into Fort Knox. I don't know if there's any gold there or not. I think it's all in China, isn't it? Here's Cecilia. Cecilia saw some big people coming into town. You had presidents, Theodore Roosevelt, Robert Todd Lincoln, President's son, went to Hodgenville, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson. All of them came by train via Cecilia to Hodgenville, to Lincoln's birthplace.
Did you know that there was gold on the train that sat during the flag because they couldn't go forward or backwards
Backward?
at West Point?
West Point, okay.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew, thank goodness. I always, every time I go to Fort Knox, I always look on the side of the road, maybe one or two bricks fell off, and they're lying there. I missed a great opportunity at Fort Knox one time. We just had a storm, and of course it had moved to the east, and there was a rainbow. And I was right by the gold depository, but didn't have a camera. There's this rainbow, which I considered, but missed that opportunity. Here's Cecilia. This is where your branch line to Hodgenville left off. And they had a little light engine, not very heavy, that went over to Hodgenville and back. They ran mixed service for a while. They had straight passenger trains up until the 20s. And here's the crossing at Elizabethtown. They crossed the LMN there, or now today CSX. They had an manual interlocking. Here's the train at Hodgenville. My grandparents are from Hodgenville, so when I went over to see them there, I shot down the street when I heard a whistle. And they had a Y there. Of course, they had to turn the locomotive for the return trip. This gives you some idea of the time schedules. You had a couple of trains that would stop at, the fast trains all stopped at Litchfield. And then you had a conditional stop, that's what that letter stands for, at Grayson Springs, which of course is known as, what today? Clarkson, okay. Your accommodations stopped everywhere, all stations. In fact, you could either go out to the track and just flag them down. There's just like a bus, a real unique service. And of course, the slower trains took longer because they stopped so many times. The mail, cream, newspapers, even bread, mail, and all kinds of what they call less than carload freight would be shipped. It was just like UPS today. Here's Big Clifty. It closed in 41 after the last slow train was discontinued, or accommodation. Most of your IC stations were about the same design. They had 2 or 3 floor plans. This is the trestle at Big Clifty, Clifty Creek. 891 feet, 128 feet up. They tell me at Eastern time, the fun thing was to do was to cross the trestle. Hopefully no trains were coming. Here's when they were building the new bridge. The old bridge had a curve in it. And the new one, when they built it, they made it a straight shot across. And the P&L right now is replacing the bridges on Monroe Hill with concrete bridges, doing away with the old steel. Now they did this primarily because it enabled them to use heavier steam engines, which means that they could also haul more freight. And the money came, it was a federal program, it was the Public Works Administration gave them the money to get it done.
Real quick,
Yes.
which one of those, Dad, did you take a backhoe across?
That's the big one up at Fort Knox.
That's the one.
Okay.
Oh, God.
But see, here's your old one, and here's your new one being constructed. Of course, the highway would be over here. Or no, on this side.
We need pictures of those to go within our
I think these are new ones that I'm going to make sure you get. A friend of mine at Forest Branch gave me this because his dad was in it. He was a section crew, and they were just taking a break there on the bridge. And my father took this picture from his ultralight. In 1992, they ran a steam engine from Louisville down to Paducah, and they ran a couple of trips out of Paducah to Central City. This engine came off the Nickel Plate Railroad. It's owned by the Fort Wayne, Indiana Railroad Historical Group. And they even put an authentic IC whistle on it. Made it sound just like the real
I'd
thing.
like to have a copy of that photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came up, I was over here on the bridge, and he was above me. And there was an excursion in '57 that they ran to Central City on the bridge. And here's one in '61 that they stopped at West Clifty to take on water. That's what the water tank. Now these pictures you all came from something that's kind of unique. During World War I, the federal government took over control of all the railroads. And one thing they made them do was to come up with everything that they own, whether it be a drawing, photograph, whatever, stations, bridges, water tanks, coaling towers, and those evaluation forms, we've got a set of them in Illinois Central Railroad Historical Society I belong to. And those photographs are fantastic because they're coming from the 1916, 1920 era. So that water tank, and I can still remember that tank being there. Here's Clarkson or Grayson Springs. The name actually was changed in 1882, but they didn't get around to the station. The railroad didn't change it until about the 1930s. And that's what it looked like in the late 30s. You notice the old sign, Grayson Springs, they've got the new sign over it, Clarkson. This took place out here at the stockyard. This was a northbound coal train, and somebody, they suspect, put somebody on the track like a tie, and it jumped the tracks, the front trucks did, and the next thing you know, the whole train went down the side of the embankment. Nobody was hurt, nobody was killed, and the engine was salvaged and put back into service. But it was quite an effort to get it back up this hill. Unfortunately, in the 70s, the Illinois Central, because of deferred maintenance, this was a common occurrence. This happened between Clarkson and Litchfield on the curve up there.
Remember that one?
Yeah. Took them a long time to clean up things. Now, this is one of my old slides I took back in the 60s, all around Litchfield. A little bit fuzzy, it's not as clear as that hope it was going to be. But this is the depot, and Jim Rice was the agent here. Jim Rice put up with me for a long time. He was very tolerant of a young rail fan who was curious at what was going on. Of course, then Aubrey Stevenson followed him.
Do you know when the derailment at the Eclipse Bridge was?
Big Clifty Bridge. Oh, that's not been too long ago. The one that, yeah, they took out all the cross ties or the timber ties.
Because
on the street.
there's still a set of trucks
Trucks
going
down
underneath,
there, yeah.
underneath the bridge.
Here's Litchfield, and I'm still amazed at this photograph because the main line is right here, or it looks like it's here, but this is the passing track now. And of course, they've shortened it. It connects before you get to the crossing. So, but a southbound passenger train, there's the old store building that was on the other side for years. Egg-and-ring, yeah.
My daddy said that building started out as a Jones Brothers.
Yes.
It was.
It was.
first.
Yeah, you're right.
And that buggy sitting beside it is what carried the passengers from the train to the Liza house.
Yeah.
Well,
That's true. Okay, here's that 2613 Mountain engine that ran well, they made one trip to Paducah all the way, then they went to Dawson Springs on its final trip. Unfortunately, that engine didn't survive, it got scrapped. Let's see, going forward, I need to go this way. Okay, there's another view of the depot. I think this picture came from here, if I remember correctly. There was a waiting room that it was segregated as Jim Crow laws in the southern states required. You had separate waiting rooms for black and white. And then, of course, your agent had an office, and then you had a freight house. So it was quite extensive. When they did away with passenger service, they cut off and did away with the waiting rooms completely. And then they decided to discontinue. This was on the front page. The last passenger train may be discontinued. They tried some legal work down in Paducah to get it, to prevent them from doing it. But needless to say, the railroad showed that they had a loss and they were losing money on it, and they wanted it off the books. And the IC's last steam-powered regular passenger trains were on the Kentucky division. All the rest of it had been dieselized by this time. Aerial photographs that shows D.G. Hayes Wholesale Grocery, and then here's a line that they had that they built over to the industrial park. That's been taken out now, way later. And then, of course, unfortunately, your station is no longer here because the P&L wanted to get rid of it. They wanted somebody to buy it for $1 and then move it, which is not the easiest thing to do, especially at Frank Building. So they opted to tear it down, and some Amish people, workers came over and started disassembling it because they were going to reuse the wood, and they'd already gotten rid of the freight house section of it. I did get a piece of it.
We have the old station sign
That-
upstairs.
Oh, yeah. The reason being is I gave it to them.
Thank you.
But not much is left after they hauled it all off, what the Amish didn't take with them. Now, here's something that a lot of people haven't seen. This is down at Black Rock, or previously, before World War I, it was known as Kaisers. But the reason for the change was that was too German sounding.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of changes to more English sounding words. It was daylighted in '56, and I found out I couldn't pinpoint the date, but it was in one of their annual reports. Caneyville, you had a coal chute there, fairly modern one, and also a water tank, but no photograph of the depot. I've not seen a photograph of the depot in Caneyville. Spring Lick, found a photograph of it. This is Horse Branch, where you had your line to Owensboro. And that's what it looks like later on. The building's still there, by the way, maintenance, so way uses it. This painting, by the way, is symbolic that small towns on Sunday, everybody came down to the station to see who was leaving and who was arriving in town. And your branch to Owensboro was quite profitable. They shipped a lot of whiskey out of Owensboro. Here's Beaver Dam, old and new. They also had some tunnels down in Ohio County, one at Eccles and one at Rosine, which engineers will tell you was, it was at the top of the grade, and you were going full blast with a lot of heat and smoke. So you can imagine, I've been through one tunnel in a steam engine, and let me tell you, it was almost like I'd gone to the wrong place. That hot. They take wet cloths and put over there. And I wouldn't have cared if it was cold or hot at that point. Here's what it looks like now. I took that out of a locomotive that I was riding. These block signals were put in after World War II. They used to have semaphores, but I always used the one at Litchfield to tell me what was coming. You look down there and you see a low red, which meant that the block was occupied by a train. There's a passenger train emerging from the tunnel at Eccles in Ohio County. This is Central City, near the end of the IC's ownership. They had a lot of steam operation out of Central City, especially the coal mines in the area. This was their joint station with the L&N. And they later on built their tracks up, and it was elevated. The station still stayed on the lower level, and they had to have an elevator to get up to the track level.
David, I saw Mikado back there. I think that's the way you pronounce it.
Yes,
That's the name of the locomotive.
The wheel arrangement. And that was their primary workhorse. They had more Mikado 282s than they had any other type of locomotive. There's the track profile at Central City. Had a pretty good yard there, not much there today. Here's that new line I was telling you about that they built to serve coal mines. And there's the old line. Same mileage. If you look at profiles, the same mileage between them. Here's Nortonville. They had a joint station with the L&N, which they crossed there. And they finally did away with the old line and abandoned it. They'd taken out the crossing over the L&N, or CSX at that point. These are still standing at Dawson Springs. These cooling towers, concrete. And there's the new line, here's the old line.
What's the line that goes through Irvington?
Irvington, the CSX, that's the line between Louisville and
Yeah,
Eclipse.
their old concrete cooling towers are still standing.
Yeah, and that's kind of a symbol of the town. They had big service on the new line, but they never did carry. The old line, passenger trains used it, and the freight trains used the new line. Madisonville, I'm going backwards. And there's the station at Princeton. It was quite impressive because you had two IC lines that crossed each other there. And here we are at Princeton, and there's a line that goes to Evansville via Henderson, and a line that went to Hopkinsville. This was taken, that was taken, well, again. That was taken in 1957, near the end of steam operations. And there's the bridge across the Tennessee River down while they were building the dam, Kentucky Lake Dam. They put the railroad on top of the dam. Well, guess what? Federal government and all of its wisdom has taken the railroad off the dam now and rebuilt the bridge. And they also took the highway off. Paducah, y'all, was the big place for the IC. You had a massive shops there that was built in the 20s, and still is there today. And it's a company that rebuilds locomotives. They, of course, IC was building steam locomotives and also rebuilding them. And unfortunately, at the end of steam, they were all lined up, ready for the scrap, for the torch. Some people were lucky enough to get things off of them: bells, whistles, lights, builder plates. Here's the station at Mayfield, which was an important stop between Paducah and Fulton. Here's the station at Fulton, which served mainline trains plus the line to Louisville, also the trains to Florida. There's also an icing station for banana shipments at Fulton. They tell me that at Fulton they would test the banana, and if it needed more heat, they'd put heaters in it. If not, then they kept it cold because the bananas were sold en route. Okay, you have several lines that cross through Fulton even today. Some of them are still there. Now this is taking rail fanning to a new high right here. Unfortunately, railroads would absolutely go bonkers if they saw you do that today, standing up on top of the caboose. But that was back when it was less time. I've had the opportunity to work on a railroad, short line, 8 miles over at Princeton, Indiana. Enjoyed every minute of it, but I have a healthy respect, you all, for people who operate trains because it's a dangerous position and you've got to be careful. Couplers, air hoses, you name it, they're all there and they can be very lethal as well. But I enjoy some of my friends model you all. I tell them, fine, I appreciate your modeling. I like what you do. I admire that you try to get it to look just like the real thing, but on a smaller scale. But I tell you, my scale is 1:1. I want the big one, the actual size. But this is a garden variety, garden railroad type, and of course HO and O gauge. You have a Z and an M gauge even. And I want to just share a few pictures with you. I'm president of the Louisville High School Alumni Association. We're going to have our banquet coming up June the 30th. I've been putting together some pictures that we're going to try to make a DVD with scenes from Litchfield. Would you realize that Litchfield at one time their colors were purple and gold? And that of course became the colors of their arch rival Caneyville. They were also known as the Lizards. I don't know, Bulldog sounds a little bit more ferocious than a lizard. Unless it's a Komodo dragon, I guess. This building, you all, somebody asked me last year at the banquet, where was it? Well, guess what? It's where the prison building is at the Child Parent Center. And they just simply tore this one down and built a new one, but they also had to add a fill-in behind when they added more to that building. In 1937, this happened, by the way, this was replaced in 24. 37, they added on a wing and a gymnasium. and they put dirt down there. And that's what I'm talking about today. 37, here was the original building, this was the addition right here, and the gymnasium was an addition. And it isn't amazing that that building is still standing, but the one that they built in the 50s is not there anymore. One thing I like about yearbooks, you all, are these snapshots that they used to put in a collage. You start recognizing people. There's Jerry Joyner, that's Leon Joyner, and his wife's son. Shrewsbury, that looks like Joanne Hudson and Eddie Glasscock. But graduation, big time, that's George Burnett's daughter, Mr. Wilkie, longtime superintendent of the Litchfield Independent School District. Basketball cheerleaders, we had 3, 1 male. I was looking at their schedule here, and I marked, the win and loss. It wasn't really a fantastic season, but nevertheless, I played, and some of those schools, of course, are long gone, part of consolidation. And in this one, of 1913, 1914, I recognized one of my 3rd grade teachers, Miss Alma, and there's Miss Ella Worthington right here. And I took that photograph myself in '66 for our yearbook that year. Of course, the only thing that's remaining now is the gymnasium and the middle school. Yes, yeah, open building. And I want you to keep my mother in your prayers because she's really having a tough time. And she's up at Jewish right now, and there's quite a few health issues, so I would appreciate that. And I've got a favor to ask of you, Dan. I'd like to take a group photo, and I need 5 people in front, and we're going to give her a message, and the rest of you can stand behind her, okay? So, Joyce Thomas, you can be one of the letters. We'll let Phyllis be wishing. Ian can be you, Joyce Thomas. You can be well, right here, in order. You can be soon.
You want us to stand?
Yes.
You want us to stand facing out this way?
Yeah, I'd like to get all of you, if you all want to get together. Yes, turn around this way.
No, you're all gonna be at the end.
Turn around facing me. Yeah, turn around facing me.
Turn.
Get right in line there. Yes.
I was trying to find
Well, we
something. I
have
was
to-
telling them to look at you. They're not looking at you.
Okay, look at me.
We gotta have our
Okay.
words.
In order.
This is you.
I know I'm
Over there, okay.
See, you're,
Where's
you
she?
can see there and
There we
between
go.
her. There you go.
There you go. Now you guys are in sequence. Ken's going to be between you and Okay, here we go. We got
Just
it.
Chinese fire drill.
Exactly.
Good morning,
Thank you
America.
much. Okay, we'll take another one. Okay, thank you all very much.
All right.
This is not being here tonight.
Yes, she was intending to come.
I want you to tell me, what is the purpose of the caboose?
What is the purpose of the caboose? Well, the caboose was where the conductor rode. The conductor, and people who work on the railroad will tell you, the conductor actually ran the train, not the engineer. The conductor told the engineer when to go, when to stop. He was the boss of the train.
Okay.
And the caboose was his office. Also, on long train rides, it also had beds, it had restroom.
And what kind of communication system do they have?
Well, for years, they used just simply whistle signals. They sometimes could use hand signals if they could see each other.
Yeah.
And then, of course, later on, then they could also send messages using the air holes on the train. You could send out a message. But if they couldn't see each other, I mean, it was you had to rely on several other ways.
So the caboose was the conductor's office?
Right. And they are collector's items.
What year did they stop having the people on the end? And started using a computer or something?
Well, they call it the Japanese conductor. It's an electronic device. You see a flashing red light on the
But
end.
I remember they used to always wait.
Well, in
and
the
they'd be
80s,
standing on
the
end.
railroads saw cabooses as just another expense. And they saw it as unnecessary. Plus, they reduced their crews. You went from a flagman, a brakeman, engineer, fireman, and conductor down to 2. You have basically an engineer and a conductor now. And they'd love to get it down to one. But, you know.
Somebody's gotta keep the engineer awake.
Right, keep him away.
They say here since I've been working at Walmart, that they stopped the train over there, and they got off and went somewhere over there and got them something to eat at the
Yeah, that
Sonic.
happens.
Sonic, I went
Yeah.
to Sonic one day and their train was
Train
stopped.
was there and they were
And all
eating.
these guys were.
Yeah, it
And I
happens.
said, "What's wrong
They'll
with
do
the
it
train?"
also-
In
They said,
1960, when my mother passed away, my dad left the shops in Louisville and went to work at the shops in Paducah.
Paducah.
And I stayed with my mother's family in Louisville. In order to see my dad, she would take me over to Dumanil, put me on a freight train in the engine, and they would come down and drop me off at Millwood.
Millwood.
My dad would come from Paducah, however he got, and would come to Millwood. On Sunday night, I go back this way, and he'd get a ride to Central City or wherever and head back there. It was like a city bus, and they would,
How
I would
fortunate.
ride in an engine.
How fortunate. Well, unfortunately today railroads are very.
Oh, I can imagine the legal liability of it.
Insurance conscious.
But back then, you know, somebody needed to get their child somewhere.
Well, that was neat. That was neat.
Besides my dad, my mother was born in 1922 in Illinois in a camp car, and her brothers and sisters.
Well,
Yeah.
and they used to move those along the line and then put them on
Yeah.
siding.
Camp,
wherever they
camp
were.
car.
Camp
Yes,
cars.
it's been
Their families went with them.
families. I mean, there was furniture and stoves and,
Scott's,
Like home.
Scott's great grandfather was a extra game foreman, and he built the tracks into the atomic energy plant. Where's that down below?
Paducah, yeah.
yeah,
And
wow.
when I was a little boy, I'd go stay with them week at a time on those railroad cars.
Yeah.
Grandmother would feed 20 to 30 men up there,
Yeah.
cook for them and everything.
Grandma Gussie did, she
Yeah.
was from
Yeah,
Illinois.
and I've talked to people who, you know, they went out as a group, and a lot of times it was extra gangs where they would actually go replace rail or a bridge or something, and they would stay in that camp.
I'd go with Granddad to the old red front end. You probably remember that when you were a kid, the red front end.
Oh, I'm not that old. No, I do remember. No, I tell you what I do remember is the trolley end.
Yeah.
Up
I
here.
remember the red fries.
The red front, he'd get a 100-pound bag of beans and 200 pounds of potatoes and the groceries to feed those men. And when he bought a farm at Millwood, he paid for it with $100 bills. That was the biggest thing in the country.
Wow.
$4,000 cash, Roy Carter paid for a farm.
Farm. And they
Cash, $100 bill.
Oh.
And then the next weekend bought a new Ford tractor out of that same money from keeping those men $2,400 a team.
Well, what
was that, south wind that went from Louisville?
Southwind was a joint venture of the Pennsylvania, L&N, and Atlantic coastline.
We went to Miami?
Went to Florida, all points of
I've
Florida.
ridden the South. When I
Yeah,
was
it
little.
stopped in Louisville and Bowling Green.
One time we came from Bozeman, Montana to Chicago and changed trains in Chicago to Louisville.
Yeah. You Bozeman, you would probably come in on the Northern Pacific, and then you transferred probably to the Pennsylvania Railroad in Chicago to come to Louisville.
I remember it was 40 degrees below when we left Montana and we got to Chicago and it was around 0 and we nearly froze to death in Chicago.
I can imagine. Yes, I can imagine. The Chicago Union Station used to be, when I went through there in the summertime in the 60s, was like an oven. No air conditioning in the waiting room period. I'm sure they didn't have much heat.
When I was a kid, we had paid, my grandmother lived a couple of doors from the railroad, and we couldn't wait to see the fast train come by and grab the mail. When did they stop that?
Well,
About when?
when they didn't stop at stations on a regular stop, then they would put it on a crane, and it was like a hook device.
Like an
They had a
arm
hook in
type
the
thing,
car,
yeah.
and it would hook it.
Yeah.
And then they would toss the mail out if they had
Same
any
way.
outgoing mail. And then you could also get, and people collect them, these RPO cancellations, where if it was stamped and canceled on the train, it was RPO, and they gave you the train number and the date. And it was kind of unique, because they were just like post offices. They had to accept mail. You just stood there and handed it to them if they were at the station. They took it.
Was Herb Bernard before Jim Rice?
Herb was a clerk, I understand, at the Litchfield Depot. And then as jobs got eliminated, I think he had to end up riding the train to Fort Knox to work there to finish out. But you used to have a clerk, you had an agent, you had operators that gave gave out train orders to the engineer and the conductor. You know, you had a lot of personnel there, and then you also had people who delivered freight, you know, Railroad Express. Jim Rice told me, Walter B. Kelly,
Yeah.
gave him a lot of business with his beekeeping supplies that he shipped out by Railroad Express.
How often did passenger train pick up passengers to Litchfield? Every day?
You had four, until 1957, you had daily 2 trains, but in the 30s and the 40s, you actually had 4 each way. So, I mean, it was convenient, you know, you could go and.
How long would it take to get from Litchfield to Louisville, do you think?
Well, depending on if you're on a fast train or a slow train.
Slow train.
Slow train. Well, looking at the timetable, I think it probably would tell you.
You've done that.
I've never done that.
Never done that?
I'm sure a lot of people do.
We did.
This is 1946, so if these, my accommodations are not on here.
Be a ballpark figure, like, would it take like 2 hours or something?
I would say a little bit more than 2 hours because you had stops.
Say,
You had a stop at Cecilia, you had a stop at Fort Knox. According to this, let's see what it says.
But you could have a big day in Louisville, leave early in the morning.
Yeah, and people did, they stayed late. Well, for example, you had one that left at 9:35 from Louisville, and was in Litchfield by 11:39, so that's roughly over 2 hours.
Yeah.
So, that's not bad. And that was downtown Louisville to here.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty good.
Yeah.
1950, you could drive in a car in 2 hours.
2 hours.
2 hours and a half.
Yes. But I tell you what, if you get to Louisville now, on certain times, you don't get around very well.
We rode a train from on Granddad's Old Bound, Tennessee. We left at 6 in the morning. I never would forget that. I was a little bitty boy. I guess it was during probably 46 or 7. And we got to Litchfield at 10 o'clock that night.
Yeah, we were on night.
Rode all day and all night in Old Bound, Tennessee.
That sounded cool. Okay, any other questions? Well, thank you all for your attention.
Thanks, Dave, we appreciate it.
Okay,